Holiday greetings. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to colleagues at the U.S. China Policy Foundation. Specifically, I'd like to make a couple of comments on business relations in 2021 and looking forward to 2022. I recall starting the year with very high expectations for the Biden administration, which I had expected to be much more stable and predictable than the Trump administration. And as we approach 2022, looking back, I think I was partially right and partially wrong. What went very well in 2021 was, despite COVID, the economies of both China and the United States have been roaring right along. In 2021, U.S. exports to China will certainly reach a record and perhaps increase as much as 30% over 2020. Many of the U.S. companies within the U.S. China Business Council are having some of their best years ever. Indeed, according to our surveys, as much as 95% of the American companies invested in China are profitable. So U.S.-China relations on the corporate side are actually very positive in 2021. And I think that if you were an economist, perhaps an interplanetary traveler from Mars, and you landed on the Earth and you looked at the U.S.-China bilateral relationship, you'd say everything looks very healthy and firm and stable here. And I think that in addition to the trade and the investment numbers, on the policy side, there have been a number of positive signs as well. The Biden administration no longer talks about economic decoupling. There seems to be very little appetite within the administration to increase tariffs, while this has not been ruled out in 2022. There are no more of the childish insults which we had become used to. The Biden administration has clearly said that they're not trying to change China, but rather accept China as it is. We have fewer executive orders, such as the TikTok ban or the WeChat ban, that were subsequently overturned by the U.S. courts. And the overall orientation of U.S. foreign policy is more disciplined and predictable. So while the Biden administration has only been in power for a year, there does seem to be signs of gradual improvement. However, I remain skeptical and cautious about 2022. And I think we could break that down into the economic side and then the political side. On the economic side, the Chinese economy faces a number of stresses that have been less pronounced in the past. And most fundamentally, the Chinese government is trying to transition the Chinese economy from a net export-led and fixed capital investment-led economic growth model to a consumption-led economic growth model. And that is really hard. And thus far, at least from this analyst's perspective, I don't see the steps really necessary that would accomplish that goal, such as getting rid of hukou, a very significant structural change in Chinese taxation policy or rural land policy, a dramatic expansion of social welfare. I'm sorry, I don't see that in the cards in the immediate term. In addition, the Chinese economy is facing a number of headwinds, and they would include a quite acute real estate crisis, which I believe will be kept under control, but there will be a cost that will be paid throughout much of the Chinese economy, probably particularly in regional areas. In addition, the energy transition is proving to be very difficult for the Chinese side. One cannot doubt the commitment to reduce carbon by the Chinese government, but this is a very difficult proposition. In addition to that, there has been a regulatory flurry associated with common prosperity. And while we don't really know what the long-term contours of this policy are, we do know that there is a short-term economic cost and that a significant amount of capitalization has been lost off of the stock exchange, and that it's more difficult for Chinese high-tech and particularly internet companies to raise capital. On the political side also, I wish to remain hopeful but very cautious. As we recently saw when the two presidents met, they could be very hospitable and indeed friendly and warm with each other. But beneath that bonhomie on the personal side, the domestic politics in both countries make it more difficult for regulators, for diplomats, for government officials, for procurement officials, really to reach out to find common ground between the U.S. government and the Chinese government. I regret that there is no structure of economic negotiations or diplomatic engagement that is designed to help Chinese companies in the U.S. and American companies in China. I wish that there were a planned series of negotiations that would focus on the real market access concerns that we have with the Chinese market. Supporting phase one and supporting phase two maybe is half of a plan, but the other half of the plan would require detailed structural discussions, building up a common agenda, and most importantly, it would require some degree of compromise between the two governments. And that, I think, will be quite difficult to achieve before the 20th Party Congress in October of 2022 and the midterm election also in November, the fall of 2022. So in the meantime, I think that American companies who are invested in China and probably Chinese companies invested in the United States and all of those who trade between our two great nations are in for a little bit of a bumpy road. There is increasing risk. There are increasing costs of compliance to ensure that one is fully legal on both sides of the Pacific. And there are increasing difficulties, particularly on the travel side and on the data side. One would be hopeful that the COVID travel restrictions will be over soon, but one would be naive to expect that in the near term. Similarly, on data, both countries are sharpening their data policies. And this is making doing business between China and the United States all the more difficult all the time. And I think that that's not exclusive to U.S. And Chinese companies doing business across borders. Many Chinese companies are also having problems with Chinese data regulations. But this is an area where it is becoming more difficult and the potential conflict of law is becoming more realistic every day. For good companies, we will be able to manage, we will be able to work our way through all of these difficulties, and I am hopeful that the good economic results of 2021 will continue into 2022. But in the meantime, we're going to have to work really hard to try to stabilize the economic and the political relationship so that companies can deal in a more predictable and stable policy environment which they need if they are going to prosper over the long term. And to that end, I look forward to working with all colleagues in the U.S. China Policy Foundation in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you very much.